Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Munns, and here's the news. Today I am joined with my good friend Ron Nielsen. He is the author of the book that you need to buy called The History of Federal Lands in the United States. If you want a copy of the book, you can go to the History of Federal Lands in the United States.com. The link will be in the description box if I remember to put it there. It's imperative that anybody that is interested in trying to find solutions to understand the problem that we're dealing with in this country and to try to work on solutions, to read the book and to buy the book and to use these videos to be able to help you as you go through the book. These videos are by no way, here's my disclaimer. These these videos are no way and should not be used in any way, shape, or form to be able to replace the content in the book. We're merely just helping to offer a different way for people to understand some of the clarifications that I felt that were necessary after I went through and read the book twice. For those that say that they have a hard time reading the book, I did read it twice. I have the notes to prove it, so I know you can do it too. We're asking you to share the video. We're asking you to find people, opinion molders that could really benefit from this information, that can help use these videos as a launch pad to be able to try to create a general awareness, to try to stop the things that are happening. And we believe that that can be done as long as people are armed with the right information. So the other thing I wanted to say too was we did a we did a video last week or earlier this week. That was book video 10, and we ended up talking about the importance of 1901. We talked about the insular decisions. We talked about how things are not really yes or no. They're more situational, and it's kind of like depends on the circumstances. We talked about the admission acts for the states. We talked about the importance of military reports. We talked about the legal justification of the military system, the military power, and the constitution powers that are not prohibited, which was an interesting topic. We went into a little bit of an explanation on de jure and de facto governments, which I think is important, and we even hit up a little bit on President Lincoln. So, with all further ado, Ron, I'm just going to hand it to you, man, because you're the man of the hour, and you're the one that's going to get us out of this mess. So welcome, and thank you for joining me, and I'm just glad to join you.
Well, thanks for having me, Tom. And I'm not sure I can get us out of anything. That's a lot of pressure to put on my shoulders. I've got wide shoulders, but I'm not sure they're that wide. But I think that there are some, you know, when I went through this information, and I wasn't even planning on writing a book, I was just trying to gather the information because I was going to I wrote a series of reports, but really, I was going to report back to the guy who asked me to do this in the first place, but he didn't survive very long. You know, he was dead at 45, and so I continued gathering this information really because by the time I got that deep into it, I realized that there was something there. There was a there there. This was not a nothing burger. And so anyway, as far as this part of the book, the process of admission, this is where things start ramping up a little bit and start getting we can get a little bit more complex or not so complex depending on how we want to come at this. One of the things that you and I were talking about offline prior to starting this interview was um, when Congress passes legislation, where and how does it go into effect? Like this is I never hear any of the talking heads in the conservative circles, Mark Levin or any of these guys. I never hear them talking about when the government passes certain types of legislation where they expect that legislation to go into effect. It's almost as if the conservative branch faction believes that Congress, whenever it passes any legislation whatsoever, goes into effect across the United States equally, regardless of the nature of the legislation. And as I dug into the process of admission, the division of the property and the division of the jurisdictions between the two powers, I began realizing that's not true.
Wow.
It's talked about at that level by all the people that even the Dan Bonginos, right? But I've heard Dan Bongino say one thing that nobody else has ever said. He understands that the United States has two jurisdictions. They have a territorial one and a constitutional one. The issue is in that everybody at that level, and not down here in the nosebleed section, everybody at that level just automatically assumes that the government doesn't apply any of its territorial power domestically, and it's just not true. Let's look at it. The process of admission. And I'm just going to read some things. And when I get to certain parts of this, then I'm going to take off and go on a jaunt. There were only several territorial governments created during the Civil War. And if you look at in fact, later on in this, I'll show you. Here are here's what I'm talking about. Between 1861 and 1864, you had Montana, Idaho, Arizona, Dakota, Nevada, and Colorado. It's a few, okay, but the bulk of the territories were outside of the Civil War era being admitted into the Union. Okay, so between 61 and 64, you had those. So let's go back up here.
That's page
That's what
42
we're
for the
talking about.
for the book followers.
Yes. The outcome of the war wouldn't be immediately seen as the government maintained the structure of its program, but policy changes were coming, which are normally seen first in the territories if they are applicable, since Congress does not need long deliberations for passing legislation for its possessions, thus making sure legislation passes constitutional muster. Okay, we have to stop right here. There are certain pieces of legislation that when Congress passes cannot, jurisdictionally speaking, and under the constitutional system in the federalism system that we have, cannot go into effect inside a state's political subdivisions. However, we don't view the state of Idaho as a series of political subdivisions under state power. We view the state of Idaho as a geographical boundary you see on a map. That's the problem. The problem isn't the government. The problem is us.
So
Us. We are the problem. We
so
don't see the state of Idaho as a bunch of dots on the map, and we should. Go ahead, Tom.
So I have to clarify this. So, when I look at Idaho, I look at it like it's the sideways gun that's got the pine tree pointing out of it, right? I mean,
Right, yeah.
right, right. God bless us. And anyway, so that's Idaho, right? And to me, I have an understanding where I believe in, well, I did. I believed in state sovereignty, and I believe that the state should be able to make its own laws like any nation could, right? I mean,
Yeah,
right? Um,
right.
and so I have that basic understanding, but I need to make sure that we drive this home for for the viewers and listeners, is that you repeat what you just said again, because I feel like in my bones it's important. So you're saying that people are not looking at Idaho the way I'm looking at Idaho?
Yeah, so the way to view the state of Idaho it is as dots on a map. The dots constitute the state of Idaho. If you look at the state of Idaho as geographical out like a gun, that's the panhandle. If you say, well, that's the state of Idaho, that is not legally accurate.
Okay.
It's not legally accurate.
Because of the
Again, we've
federal.
already said, right?
So
We've already said,
what you're going back to is the I call 60-40 split, the federal lands in the state. What you're talking about are the sovereign dots, right? Is that what you're
yes,
talking about? Okay.
yes,
Just I wanted to make sure.
Idaho,
Okay.
the state of Idaho is only 10th Amendment, it's 10th Amendment power, or let's call it this way. Let's do this is what the government likes to say. The state of Idaho government is only supreme in its sphere, excuse me, and between 13 and 29% of the state landmass.
Hmm.
13% because that's roughly its state ownership, and 29% because it's 29% privately owned lands in the state. The remainder, so if you take the state land and then the privately held land, and then you have the 61% ownership of the federal government, you make up your 100%, right?
Okay.
So
Yep.
what we want to know is when the United States government passes legislation, where does it go into effect? It goes into effect anywhere where the government has any jurisdictional power.
I love this. I totally get it. I'm so excited. Sorry.
That means 61% of the state of Idaho is going to be underneath.
Say that again. You
But the
glitched.
that means 61% of the state of Idaho is going to be underneath that legislation.
Okay. Okay. I understand it perfectly.
Unless unless it's legislation passed out of the grant specific power.
Hey, Ron, I
I
just
know I'm
wanted
segue. Wait. Yes.
I just wanted you to know we're having some video issues and some audio issues. I hope that they're going to clear up, but I wanted to let you know it's a little more prevalent than normal. So
Yeah. My
not
phone's being attacked. I still haven't switched over to my
not that
hotspot
we're
yet.
going to do anything about it, but just I just wanted you to know. So if I go like that, you might
Okay.
have
Let's
to
do it.
just that'll be the point where you'll need to repeat what you said.
Okay. Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay, so I'm gonna stop share here and make sure we can see this. Okay, so I'm gonna do screen share one more time. There was a problem with the screen share. Bring this back up. Okay, so we're gonna just read this again. The outcome of the war wouldn't be immediately seen, the Civil War wouldn't be immediately seen as the government maintained the structure of its program, but policy changes were coming, which first in the territories if they are applicable. And we talked a little bit about that. Where are they applicable? Where is the jurisdiction of the government where they can move legislation into its possessions without having to account for state 10th Amendment power and private rights? Those are the two things that alter the manner in which federal legislation goes into effect. Okay. So
Unbelievable,
the
man.
territorial system operates on rules, which are much easier to draft and then put into operation than legislation. A lot of things that the government passes, and I'm going to give you an example. Lava Ridge. In 2005, Congress passed a piece of legislation for a green energy program on its possessions. When they did that, they made sure that they loaded the Code of Federal Regulations with the appropriate rules to carry it out. So the authority for the program is embedded in the Code of Federal Regulations. This is the same thing that you're going to see on the border, the the 100-mile wide border zone. And I say 50 because I count the border under our direct control from the border north 50 miles because it's in our sovereign area. But what we've
Mhm.
done is we've said to
Right.
Mexico, well, we're going to apply an exclusive power 50 miles south of the border, and we know you own that, but we're going to do it anyway. They did it at the point of a gun. But whatever. I don't want to get into semantics. They did the same thing to Canada. We're doing it. We're just doing
We're
it.
making friends
Stop it.
everywhere. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The federal government has yet to write the book on winning friends and influencing people. So
Well,
what we see from the government in like on the border issue that I was just covering, they they passed a piece of legislation and then they embedded the rules to seize. Okay, so understand that this legislation that they passed could not be construed to seize the property of the state because the Constitution does not allow the federal government to just seize state property. They have to buy it from the state.
mhm.
So the only way that they could pull off seizing a 50-mile wide strip of land across the entire United States is through the administrative process. So they passed a law for immigration and naturalization in 52, 53, something like that, right? Immediately after that, they went to the Code of Federal Regulations, and without a single hearing on the subject, they added to the Code of Federal Regulation the 50-mile wide or 100-mile wide border zone. They added it to the CFRs. They were going to seize it under the rules and regulatory power of this territorial system. Because again, the territorial system is a military juggernaut.
Okay, so I have to stop you for a sec if that's okay. Um,
Yep.
so you mentioned something that I thought was important. You said that they don't necessarily pass legislation. I remember you writing that in the book. Um,
Yeah.
or they might pass legislation, but where I end up getting lost is the legislation as regular human beings like myself would go, okay, it's either within the powers of Article 1, Section 8, or it isn't, right? And so
Yeah.
if it isn't, then it's not supposed to be something that they typically want to do. And so I would see that the administrative rules have been the enforcement mechanism that they've used to sort of expand the powers of Article 1, Section 8 that don't clearly exist. Is
That
that
is
am
100% accurate, Tom. You nailed
I'm
it
getting it.
on the head.
I'm
It
getting
is
it.
the rules and regulatory system being used that allows them to circumvent the normal constitutional process.
So is there a is so for the viewers and things that are just grasping this, is there a simple example that we can use to this effect? So if they want to, they might be able to look it up or whatever if
Yeah, the
they're inclined
border
to do
zone is
that.
a perfect
The
example.
border
Go
is
look at
okay.
Yeah,
So
go look at the rule, the Code of Federal Regulations. You will find the border zone rules. I forget exactly which one it is now.
it's fine.
I used to have it dug up, but I don't even know where it's at right now.
Mhm.
But you find that rule and look at the rule and then compare it to the legislation that was passed, and you will not find the seizure of the 100-mile border zone in the legislation. It doesn't even mention it, but you will find it in the Code of Federal Regulations.
So when we look at this system, the way that we think it exists, you know, I always figured that when the legislature ends up creating the law, Congress, whatever, that the judiciary would be aware of the legislation that is being passed and then flag anything that isn't constitutional. I've since changed my belief drastically, and only when something actually becomes contested does the judiciary even get involved. Is that right?
Well, it yeah. See there's a there's a I think a severe misinterpretation of the judicial power of the United States Supreme Court. If you look at Article 3 lays out the judicial power of the Supreme Court. Nowhere in Article 3 does it give the Supreme Court the ability to use any force whatsoever to affect an object.
Hmm.
It has no enforcement power. It can only render decisions, and it can only do so through a series of its jurisdictional qualifiers. We
So
these are like
this is more of a Politburo type, tyrannical type of branch then to some degree, right? In that,
you're talking
it,
about the judiciary.
yes, if it has the if we believe now they're only that way because we have been led to believe them and we don't know how to fight our way back, but the idea that they can rule on something, I always thought that they can give opinions. They
Well,
can give
we have to
opinions all day
understand what
long.
it is that we're talking about because I read a lot of Supreme Court precedent, a lot of it, right? And you have to divide Supreme Court precedent into two different functions: the Article 3 precedent and the
Mhm.
Article 1 precedent.
Right.
If we're talking about Article 1 precedent, you're talking about a very different system than the one that I'm talking about.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
if somebody says to me the Supreme Court of the United States, blah, 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 I'm like, I don't think you understand. The Supreme Court of the United States had an oral argument at bar over the issue with the fishermen off the coast, the western coast of the United States. The fishermen sued because they say that the entire administrative process is unconstitutional that's being used against them to force them to abide by a whole bunch of the rules and regulatory power of the government in the territorial seas.
Hmm.
So the attorney for those guys at bar,
Hmm.
the Supreme Court judge, and I think it was I forget which judge it was trying to get the attorney to answer one simple question. He was saying to this attorney repeatedly, I need you to tell me under what under what circumstances we can intervene on this case. Here's what he was trying to ask the guy. If the United States government is exercising its territorial jurisdiction, there are only a few methods that the United States Supreme Court has to intervene.
Mhm.
Only a few. And he was trying to get the attorney to tell him exactly what those were.
Mhm.
And if the attorney would have been able to do that, he would have seen that the issue that they were fighting at bar may not fit. But the attorney, he had to keep saying to the attorney, "You're not answering my question." The reason why is because the attorney didn't understand what it was the judge was asking.
Right.
So why am I saying this? Because it is not very well understood that there are two judiciaries in the United States, one that exists under Article 3 and one completely independent of that power. It is an Article 1 creature of Congress.
Right. And so the important part of what we have just talked about for the last 15 minutes, I just want to make sure that we recap this so that we can kind of condense things before we move on, is because it all pertains to the topic at hand, right? It looked
Yeah,
like that we were kind of shifting and going down the rabbit hole or whatever, but it has a direct consequence, connection to exactly what you're saying. If we're going to use, like you were talking about Lava Ridge, for example, if we wanted to be able to pull that one, pull a fast one there or whatever, you would have to, the first thing that we would have to do is to, number one, understand that we have an Article 1 system and an Article 3 judiciary, and article and understanding exactly what that means. Once you understand that, we would have to go back to the original part of what we were talking about before, about Idaho being defined by dots. And how I equate that is simply this, is what you'd said earlier. We do not have 100% sovereignty where we don't have 100% ownership.
that's
So
right.
if Idaho is owned by the federal government, or they control 60% of the lands, then that means that Idaho only has arguably 40% of its ability to exercise its sovereignty.
Yeah,
So what we could also say is that if we have an issue like Lava Ridge, and Lava Ridge just happens to be on BLM, or it happens to be on USDA, we've got a bigger problem,
that's
right?
right. Now we're talking. Now we're into the process of admission. How much of the state of Idaho was being admitted into the union? Only a small portion. We think the entire state was admitted into the union. It's not true. It's not true. It's just not true. The state of Idaho exists in its 100% Article 10 power, 13%, and then there's it's debatable as to whether or not it can apply that same 10th Amendment power to the private property at 29%. And like you say, you might be able to arrive at 40% of the state of Idaho's jurisdiction being able to be applied. But look, if some of these corporations are foreign corporations that are aligned and partnered with the federal government, the state's not going to get jurisdiction. So, how much of that 20% can the state apply? We don't know.
Okay. So to understand this, when you say that Idaho was only partly admitted into the union, it should say partially esto perpetua. Sorry. What I mean to say is uh, which parts that were
Yes,
admitted into the union, and I guess you're
yes.
getting to that, right?
Which parts? Right. Anything the parts of Idaho that are in the union, that are part of the union, that were admitted into the union, and we can look at them now. At the time, Idaho was admitted a little bit different, but it's grown since then. But anything that is incorporated,
Okay. Which means, for the people that didn't listen to the last video or forget things like I do, incorporated is incorporated is uh let's see. You might have to say it because I don't. Incorporated is private rights apply, and
That's the
incorporated means that private rights don't apply, right? So
Now
in
there's also another definition. I just brought up another one.
Mhm.
Incorporated in this sense means part of the state, or incorporated would also mean part of the federal government, because remember, you got two sovereigns.
Right.
So if the state of Idaho's got command over this landmass that's in the shape of a gun, the state of Idaho, how much of it's incorporated into the state and how much of the other land is incorporated into the federal government.
Okay.
And if it's not incorporated into the federal government, then the Constitution cannot apply. If it's not incorporated into the state, the Constitution of the state cannot apply.
Can you say that one more time? What you just said?
If it's not incorporated, if okay, so
Just say it the way you said
if you've got areas, well, I don't know if I can. I'm not sure I
it.
can.
Sorry.
I can come at it a different way because the
Fine.
concept is fresh in my mind. I
Okay.
understand the concept well, but I'm
Okay.
not going to be able to probably say it in the exact same way.
Okay. That's
I'm going
fine.
to have to come at it a different way now.
Okay.
So I'm going to do it. So if the state of Idaho wants to apply its 10th Amendment power, it
Mhm.
must do so. Okay, not just its 10th Amendment power, but its Constitution. So let's say that the state of Idaho's 10th Amendment power and the Constitution are the same thing, meaning that the Constitution follows the state flag.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
so anytime I say the Constitution follows a flag for the state, that's okay. So incorporation means that the Constitution follows the flag for the state.
Okay.
For the federal government, incorporation means that the Constitution follows the flag for the federal government.
Okay. Okay. Good. Okay. I don't know why that just takes is just so hard for me to wrap my head around. Okay. Hopefully other people get it easier than I do. So you
Well,
probably have to
again,
explain it a few more times later on
look,
down the road.
it's
That's good.
if this concept can confuse a United States sitting United States Supreme Court judge,
Hmm. Okay. I
what?
don't
Oh,
feel so
shit!
bad.
So okay. So anyway, let's go on.
Okay.
So we recapped all that because we have to understand before we go any further into admission, we have to understand what it is that we're talking about. What are we admitting into the union? That's the issue. That's why we're getting into this. What are we admitting into the union? That's why it's important to tie all this stuff together and have a mastery of it before we go too much further. Okay, the original process created by the Northwest Ordinance was a national government that would control the entire area it was drafted specifically for. So we will deal with the admission of these areas before we move on to the admission of the Louisiana territories and the remainder of the Western properties. Territories. I should probably rewrite that to say territories. Well, it's actually it's actually it's actually accurate. So anyway, be it ordained by the United States and Congress is simple that the said territory for the purpose of temporary government be one district, and we talked about this before. However, divided up into two districts, and we know now that there were two districts. There was a Northwest Ordinance government
Uh-huh.
and a Southwest Ordinance government. And then also, when they divided the territory up, those divided territories were no longer part of that one district. They were something else entirely. They were organized territory. So that it
Hmm.
just remained at all times two districts, the one in the north and the one in the south. Okay. And then we know that as soon as there would be 5,000 free male inhabitants of full age in the district, upon giving proof thereof to the governor, and these were the people that were going to send elect representatives to the territorial government, right? So this territorial government was not the same type of government as the United States constitutional government. It was a territorial machine, and anytime Congress passed legislation, it went into effect in the territories. So that's why we go through these exercises. Where does this where when Congress passes legislation, where does it go into effect? Why? Because I saw it when I put this together. Oh, when they pass certain types of organic legislation, it only applied to the unorganized, unincorporated territory.
So the whole thing that we need to do is figure out what isn't.
Right. Right. When we receive a mastery, when we get this down, the federal government's no longer going to be able to do the Jedi mind trick on us anymore. We're going to have a very, very clear understanding that when they pass legislation, and it looks like it can only go into operation in the territories, we're not going to freak out and send out a warning to everybody and post this all over Facebook, etc. We'll
Right.
know that if they go too far, we'll take them into court. We'll beat them.
Right.
We'll beat them. Okay.
That's pretty optimistic. That's what people need, though, right?
I read Supreme Court precedent. They're getting the federal government right now is getting their little behinds handed to them because what they've done is they've Jedi mind tricked everybody to believe that they have total power. So when they pass legislation, it goes into effect, including inside of states' political subdivisions, including over private areas. And it's just not true. So people sue the government. They've been suing the government for 4 years and winning
Mm.
and winning. Why? Because they're doing it in an Article 3 setting and not an administrative setting. If you sue the government and then take the case to the government's own courts, what are you going to get?
It just doesn't sound good to
The
me.
United States government's powers are in Article 1, and they have Article 1 courts, and then you sue them and you take them to one of their courts. What do you think that their courts are going to do?
They're
They're going
gonna,
to what
they're,
you
they're
see happening to uh, uh, Donald Trump. That's what you're going to get. What you see happening to
right.
Diego and Ammon Bundy. That's what you're going to get.
Mhm. And that's what we're gonna get with Lava Ridge.
Understand something in the state of Idaho prior to 2019. If you were in an administrative proceeding and it had a constitutional outcome and everybody was clear that the disposition of the case was going to require a constitutional ruling, they couldn't do it in the state. They had to go to Spokane or somewhere in Washington to do it. Why? Because there was no Article 3 judge in the state of Idaho until 2019. When I say that to people, there isn't nearly enough outrage. Do you understand the ramifications of not being able to get a constitutional ruling on a matter in the state of Idaho because you didn't know the difference between the two court systems?
That's exactly why you're not getting the response that you would hope to get.
That's exactly right. And it's not the Supreme Court of the United States that's doing this. They didn't do it. Congress did it and still does it. And they're the ones going on front of the camera right now and going, gee, we don't understand what's going on. Everything looks like it's out of control. Gee, we don't know this. Gee, we don't know that. They're lying to you. They're lying to you.
Okay. All right. So let's take that on for a moment. Now we've recognized the overreach, the the legislature, right? And
Yeah.
it's time to talk about a remedy for the states. So the average, I know this, as I talk about it all the time, the average response is going to be, well, for anybody that knows it, is, well, we exercise the 10th Amendment, or you go to the 10th Amendment Center and they'll talk about it all day long, about how they have the power to do it. Um, the other part of it is where we come in and say, okay, well, if the state wants to do, if they want to remedy this situation against this abuse, how would it do it when the when the state is only 40% owned by the state, or I should say 60% ownership of the federal government? How does the state right that ship, Ron?
Well, the first thing they have to understand is this: where is their power applicable? First thing, because you can't defend an area that belongs to the federal government. So you would need to know if it belongs to you or the federal government. It's like the water issue. The water issue it's a huge issue right now. It's being deliberated in the state of Idaho because the federal government sued the state, because the state told the federal government that it had some water leases that it had bought from the state and never used. And the state goes, well, our state law says that if you don't use them, you forfeit them in a certain time frame, and you forfeited them, so you need to apply for them again. And the federal government goes, well, wait a minute, no, 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 no. Here's their argument. Their argument is we're different. We're
Of
different.
course they are.
You can't apply that to us. We're the federal government.
I'm
That's their
different.
argument.
You know, Ron, you and I are different.
That's the thrust of their
Okay, so
argument. We
all
were
right, so
listening to
then
the argument.
how do we go about determining which land is ours where we can exercise this sovereignty and push back and what isn't?
It's going to take an investigation by the state.
Okay.
The state of Idaho is going to have to allocate, they're going to have to pass legislation, they're going to have to allocate a team of surveyors to go out and demarcate all the boundary lines.
Oh my gosh. Can we get federal funding?
Right? This is it's going to yeah, so we're going to tell the federal government, well, we're going to take absolute possession of all of our property, and we're going to make sure we understand exactly where that is, and we're going to want you to fund it. So could you give us some money to do that?
Oh my gosh. I
You know, the
can't even
government's
begin.
going to go, no.
Yeah, I can't even begin to think what I mean, the average person's just going to shut the video off right now and go, there's just, if that's really what it's going to take, there's just no way out of this. Do you see a way out of this?
Yeah, yeah.
Having to implement that
Remember,
process?
well, remember I was talking before that the federal government's ownership principle in FLIPMA, it's unconstitutional.
Oh, so once that flips, excuse the pun,
Right.
then things are going to start shaking loose.
Yeah,
So,
because
okay.
they'll be forced to restart the disposal program.
Okay, forced to. Okay, that's a good one. Okay, so I know that we were going to talk about Lava Ridge and incorporate that in here. Don't forget that. I didn't want to
Yeah,
keep injecting that into it if you're not ready for that yet, because
right.
like I said, this chapter is pretty well marked up for me. But since you're on a roll, go ahead and do that. And if I don't
Well, so
understand something, I'll
okay,
raise my
no
hand.
problem. Yeah, just anytime I say something, you're like, whoa, 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 time out, just stop me.
Okay.
All right, so we're sort of at the Lava Ridge moment because we know that the Lava Ridge corridors that were created by the 2005 law, and understand something, the 2005 law had a 20-year shelf life. It was granted for 20 years. So it comes back up for renewal in Congress in 2025.
What law is this? Do you know?
The 2005 law that created the authority to build the corridors for these projects.
Do you know what law it is? Or do we have to look it up?
Well,
Don't worry about it. If you know, yes. If you don't, that's fine.
well, right off my mind, I can't remember what it was called. It was the 2005 um, Renewable Energy
Oh, it's an Agenda
Act or
21.
something like that.
Okay, never mind. Okay.
What was yeah? So it's a Renewable Energy Act of 2005. So they were well ahead of this. They knew well in advance. Again, these are members of Congress. These are the same people that went on television a year ago. The same. So you got a MAGA group in Congress. They go on television. This part of this MAGA group goes on television, and they admit that the District of Columbia is under its exclusive power. They admit it on national television.
Mhm.
Admit it, and nobody picked it up. Nobody but me. I go on Facebook. I'm like, holy crap, look at this. And everybody goes, yeah, I don't understand what it is I'm looking at.
All right.
They admit it. So what is the importance of that admission? Well, if I would admit that DC is under exclusive power, I would also go, and unfortunately, all the J6 prisoners that we have here are not being given their private rights because Congress is choosing not to do that. They leave that alone. They don't touch that with a 10-foot pole.
That's right. That's exactly right. I wouldn't have touched
These are
that
the
place with a
same
10-foot
people
pole.
that don't tell you what you need to know about where legislation goes into effect in the United States. They don't want you knowing. And they feign ignorance. It's an act. It's all an act. Now, there are some good legislators in Congress for sure. But for the
Mhm.
most part, it's all an act, man. They know exactly what the frick they're doing. Okay. So, the Lava Ridge Project. 2005, they passed that law. That law can only go into effect from a jurisdictional situation, can only go into effect on the government's or in the government's property only. They but what they did is they created some funding mechanisms to entice the state into the program. The state took the money. The state is bound to try to find a way to get the project to pass because it took the money, the grant money that was allocated. And just to confirm that, Connie Kitchelow sent me the link the day that they were going through the appropriations hearings this year, and I went and I watched the appropriations hearing. And sure enough, there were several programs, grant programs that were talked about out of the Lava Ridge Project 2005 law that the state had availed themselves of, and they were given a report as to the status of that funding to the and of course, the legislature, no problem, no sweat off their brow. They know what they're doing, Tom.
Yeah, they
They
do.
all know what they're doing, and they're all complicit to one manner or another. Okay, so now we know that legislation, we have to be very, and I'll give you another example. Let's say the United States government passes, or the executive branch under Joe Biden. Let's say they issue an executive order seizing guns. It will freak everybody in the United States out except for me. Why? Because I know they can only apply it on their property. They if they try to apply it outside of their property or on private property in the state under the state's control, you take them to court and sue them, and you're going to beat them. You're going to
Right.
beat them. Why do I say you're going to beat them? Because if you take it to an Article 3 setting,
Mm-hmm.
the Article 3 setting already has long-standing precedent on the matter. They're not going to overturn it just for Joe Biden's executive order.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So this is
You
so I mean this kind of thing I'm seeing threads of Agenda 21 because I pulled up HR 6 already 2005 I got that it's got Agenda 21 written all over it Agenda 2030 it's a clear indication that something from a global scale World Economic Forum UN has permeated national government for sure, and because and for a variety of reasons, it is now within our own state legislature as we have emulated federal law. So, but I'm also thinking Greg Pruitt. I'm thinking, okay, the gun groups and all that kind of thing. This is really, really important for them to be able to understand because I see the gun folks as concerned, as rightly as they should be, but I don't see them when they're called to protest, for example, they show up, and I don't mean this out of disrespect. I'm just stating the fact. When Greg sends an email out to protest about some sort of gun ban or whatever, that's the only thing they do that I'm aware of. I mean, Greg's working behind the scenes with legislation and stuff, but the citizens, I don't think, are part of the equation except for the when they need to show a show of force or testimony or phone calls. Don't you think that this is a crucial and absolutely vital component for gun organizations, Greg's or otherwise, to understand so that they can begin working on this issue from a slightly different perspective than we are?
if the gun, I agree with you wholeheartedly, 100%, Tom. If I want to take what you said there just the next step further, okay. If the gun groups and the gun lobbies in the United States really wanted to create a problem for the United States every time the executive branch issues an executive order,
Mm-hmm.
they would challenge the reach of that executive order.
Mm-hmm.
And they would understanding this, they would say, we want to know exactly. You tell us right now. They could do a declaratory judgment even, so that they're not in direct competition with the government, and just do a declaratory judgment. Just say, we want you to tell us, Article 3 court, exactly where this executive order can go into effect.
I don't think any of us have ever thought to do that.
Nope. Nope,
I would be,
because
I would be, wow.
they don't understand this component.
So when I ask for, because the next thing I'm going to do, since I'm dealing with a lot of people that they don't know me well enough to be able to understand I read a lot and I'm not stupid and I can see things for what they are. Um, but I need to provide continuity from the things that I know, maybe up here, right? As far as understanding to them down here, right?
Yeah,
So as it relates to things like the UN or Agenda 21 in this case that I'm currently working on, it would be like, well, Tom, I see that Agenda 21 is real. I see it's in the United Nations documents, but that doesn't mean it's happening here locally. So the burden of proof is on me
right,
to be able to prove that. So
right.
like that, I would have to throw this back at you again, or at least to reiterate and say, okay, you've made the claims that we are not absolutely 100% sovereign because of this whole federal land ownership or whatever it is. What evidence do you have to be able to make that claim that would give people like myself the concrete confidence needed to be able to really bring this to question? Because unless people have enough evidence to be able to make their claim, they're not going to do it.
So
So
you don't think there's
what would
enough
be,
evidence in this book?
well, no, the evidence is great in the book. The problem is getting people to read it. That's the problem.
Yeah,
So what we would have to do is to be able to break this down into pieces and say, I'm really, really interested, and maybe it's just it's in there, and I just have to look at it differently. But you know, I just want to make sure that if we have this evidence, right? So maybe the evidence you have is in the book. I'm thinking something different. Maybe I'm thinking of the red and white map. I'm like, okay, we got a red and white map. The red areas are what they are, and the white areas are what they are. We don't really know what areas those are because the state of Idaho has not surveyed those, and I'm assuming the federal government probably hasn't either. Maybe.
yeah, they
So,
surveyed them.
oh, they have. So
Oh yeah,
even if we didn't survey them, we would be able to FOIA request, maybe.
yeah. So when you look at this, is interesting. The federal government contains all the meets and bounds for all of its property and
Hmm.
all of the state's property because it gave the meets and bounds
Hmm.
for the state for the property that it was granting to the state in the state's admission act. So it's got all the meets and bounds because it sent its surveyor out to do all of that work. I don't know that they might just hand all that over. I don't know.
How,
But
how,
unless the state tries to get it,
well,
they should at least try.
can a guy like me, you could direct me or somebody could direct me, we'll just say somebody else, could direct me on what I was supposed to do and to be able to create this request and do it and see what comes back?
Yeah, absolutely. Do it for you. FOIA the internal. I would FOIA the Department of the Interior and say, I want all the meets and bounds for all of the granted land granted to the state of Idaho by the United States government. Um, you could say across the boards,
Hmm.
like from admission till now or
Right.
whatever. Word that however you need to.
Well, that's good. It's just a good thing to sort of put into people's minds, the listeners of the video series, to kind of wrap their head around that. Some people might be better suited to be able to do that than I am, and I'm just merely putting that out there. Although I would love to have the time to be able to do that and go, Ron, guess what I found? But I think at some point for us to be able to deal with this problem, it's inevitable that this happens. It's inevitable that somebody does it because we need to be able to figure out what's what. And we can't just operate in this sort of weird, random, arbitrary nature of, whatever the feds say goes. And then the states just sit there and say, oh, well, the feds say, I mean, we hear that all the time, right? The governor
Yeah.
and unseating constitutional amendments that were rightfully voted by the people of Idaho and all of this stuff. I mean, this clearly, I think it more than any other time in this book, I have this issue right here is definitely something that could be a barn burner, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, because look, again, the Lava Ridge project is like, well, how did the Lava Ridge project come about? Well, it came about because it's proof that the government has some level of authority over that property.
Yep.
It's proof.
And it would be unlawful for us to be able to think that we could engage in an area that is outside of our lawful authority. Wouldn't
That's
you
right.
agree? So
That's
for us,
exactly right.
we better be a little bit cautious here when we go, like whether we decide to go to J6 or not, is to be able to understand exactly what we're walking into.
That's
Because,
right.
ladies and gentlemen, from what I'm seeing right now, as cautious as I am now, we better just be really, really cautious and understand exactly what's going on before we want to slay the dragons in somebody else's house.
That's exactly right. You need to know where you're at when you're if if you're if you're going to oppose the government, you need to make sure that the place that you're standing on when you make your opposition to the government is protected space. Now, whether that's privately protected, I wouldn't count on the state to protect you. The state's going to do the bidding of they're the henchmen of the federal system.
Right.
They're at its disposal. I
Hmm.
wouldn't count on that. Look
Yeah.
at what they did to Ammon Bundy and Diego. Look
Yeah.
at that. They just destroyed two families and did it in public. And before that, they murdered a guy on national television. Nobody's ever said a word against Lavoy Finnegan being shot. It's like,
It's
you
it's
know,
but it was the cow's fault, man. I mean, it's
well, you know, um,
maybe
we have to understand this. If we don't get this, we're never going to do a damn
that's
thing.
right.
A
That's right.
damn thing.
And this is why when you say that everything that we're dealing with today deals with the land issue, I did know that. Well, I knew that from reading it in very short order, I knew that. But what became absolutely clear to me was the importance of this red white map in how to fight this war.
Yeah, that's
That's the
right.
crux of it. I mean, the history is good, a good part of that, but if you don't have an understanding of that red white map, um, do you we're just going to be what shooting at hallucinations or whatever.
Yeah,
So
yeah, you're chasing ghosts, man. You don't
right,
know who your enemy is.
right.
It's everything's ambiguous. You don't even know where you stand. You don't know where you're standing. You don't know if you're standing on an area that it has some level of self-protection, and you want to have look, the citizens' protection is private rights.
Yeah,
That means you want to be in an area where you can exert those private rights as a protection mechanism against a tyrannical government. So
I'm
you
excited.
better understand where you're standing.
I'm excited to send this to the Love Ridge group. By the way, any viewers or anything that's dealing with any thing related to wind farms, oh, I got to tell you this. The wind farms around the country, this is your deal. If you're fighting the feds on any particular issue, this is your deal. I was just communicating this morning with a lady that's fighting carbon capture pipelines in Ohio. I mean, in Iowa. Oh my gosh, man. They want to pass 90,000 miles of CO2 pipeline. They want to take a gas that you can't see. They want to build a pipeline for it and they want to push it into the ground. But they're using eminent domain and abolishing private property in the process. I have to make sure that there are people that I know, people that I can connect to that understand this issue. So I'm hoping this particular video will get out there. So we need to make sure that we end it as powerfully and not don't allow me to deviate any more than I need to.
Right.
Because this is an important issue. Um, so carbon capture pipelines, this is your video. Um, and any other issue that I can think of, this is your video. So Ron, I don't mean to interrupt or whatever, but if you're on a roll, keep going unless I've
No,
completely
so
flattened.
I'm glad that we're talking about this because again, I know it seems like I'm just kind of hammering the same point home, but it's like when I was putting this together, well before I was going to write this book, the thing that stood out to me the most is exactly what we're talking about. When the state of Idaho and the rest of them were admitted into the, it was not what everybody thinks it is, and because it equated to in reality a process of admitting dots on the map, the state of Idaho, and so you see this in the 1901 Downs versus Bidwell case. They created a 6-point doctrine and they laid out in the doctrine the situation. But I'm putting the cart way before the horse. We're not even quite yet to the chapter of the case that never existed. Right?
I love
We're
that.
talking about admission.
I love that topic. That's
Yeah,
that's clickbait for sure.
yeah.
It
So
should be
anyway, so So admissions. So we're talking about only a specific grant of land, and this gets into the slavery question. Slavery question. This is a see this right here. This is out of the book Organic Acts for the Territories. This is all of them, or at least all of them that are relevant to our discussion right here. So this is the list of the Organic Acts, and I just cut it and pasted it on in the book so you can see that I'm not making this stuff up. I'm pulling this out of official books and official documentation. Um, and this book just remember last video we were talking about the Foraker Act being the basis of the challenge of the Downs versus Bidwell decision?
Yes.
Guess who wrote this book? It was compiled by Mr. Foraker. And this was put out by the United States Government Printing Office by Mr. Foraker. Okay. Each of the admission acts that you look at represent negotiation between the inhabitants of the state and the federal government. It's a negotiation. In every one of the admission acts, one of the things that the federal government made the inhabitants do upon admission is agree that the federal government was going to maintain power over its territory.
Mm.
It made the states agree to it for admission. And here's what I write, and it's all in black. It's in bold. It is this model the North utilized after the Civil War to admit the Southern states into the same union into which the territories were being admitted. They forced the Southern states to agree to terms just like they were forcing the Western states to agree to terms upon admission. Once they agreed to the terms, they were admitted.
Wow. Talk about a vassal state
The
arrangement,
Southern
huh?
states were going, well, wait a minute. We're supposed to be part of that group that's admitting these Western states. And then the part of powerful party that had risen said, no, you're no longer the group that's doing the admitting. You're now in that group that's being admitted.
Wow.
That is a fact. They were admitted into the Union. They were not restored to their Confederate status. Illinois procedure for statehood. So I used Illinois. What was a land program supposed to look like? Let's use Illinois. Illinois procedure for statehood was beset with difficulties in admission, mostly due to the slavery matter, which compelled Congress to keep moving the goalposts on the Illinois territorial conversion to statehood. And then I have a little blurb in there from Illinois' own documentation on this matter.
Mm-hmm.
A common thing among admission acts is that the territory would need to agree to abolish slavery, and absent the unified intent to do so, admission dragged out longer than it would have otherwise, like in the case of Illinois. The majority of Illinois pro-slavery contingent were French. It goes into some issues with Illinois. In practice, the 12 Western states should have eventually looked like Illinois. Let's do a screen share of Illinois, shall we? This is what Idaho should have looked like. You see the legend to the left?
All white, you
You
mean?
got Department of Defense, Fish
Oh,
and
yeah.
Wildlife, Forest Service, other agencies.
Oh my
You see
gosh,
much
yeah.
of those colors on that
No,
map?
not at all. Not at all. That's great.
That's what Idaho was supposed to look like at the close of the land program. All the states were supposed to look like this.
As opposed to red, everybody.
It's supposed to all red.
Right.
This was the intention of the land program disposal. It was
Mm-hmm.
supposed to look more like this. This is what everybody believes the land program was supposed to produce, and they're right. But they believe it based on a false set of assumptions. Okay, so I use Illinois for the example because it's a really good example. It was part of the northern government, not part of the southern government, but obviously we know that Illinois was carved out of the Northwest Territories. But all of the Northwest Territories, look them up. They all look like this, or some version of this.
Hmm.
This was the intention of the land program. But you see this river right here? So you got the Missouri Compromise that ended up being part of this. This was the division, this boundary condition
Hmm.
was part of the division of down here in the southern part. In the north, there was the boundary didn't exist. This is all Iowa and Illinois were all part of the Northwest Territories, but Missouri was not. A portion of it was, but not all of it.
Hmm.
Okay, so and these are all important because the system, the flow of events, and the timelines are absolutely critical to understanding this issue. All right, so now we understand. We have a good idea of what the land program was supposed to produce and then the change in the land program after the Louisiana Purchase. Okay, let's go back to here. Let's do another screen share. Go back to our book.
And we're up on an hour too, by the way.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to get to a spot where we can segue for the next one.
Okay, I'll leave it to
Uh,
you.
so again, I'm going to cover a lot of area. The federal government certainly should not claim 61% ownership of the land in any Western state with the intent to own and hold said quantities of land ad infinitum. So we're focusing on Illinois because I want everybody to see this is the nature of the problem. The nature of the problem is if you own it, if the state or federal government can own it, or if a federal person can own it and they're a citizen of the state, then the state can apply its 10th Amendment power. There was something that happened at the end of the Civil War that we looked at yesterday that sort of threw a monkey wrench in this, and that was the passing of the Civil War amendments. One of them was the 14th Amendment. What did the 14th Amendment do? It seized all of the state's citizens and made them all federal,
Hmm. It certainly did.
made them all federal citizens. There was no such thing prior to the 14th Amendment of a federal citizen. After the adoption of the amendment, the federal court, the Supreme Court of the United States, had to grapple with it. They had to grapple with it. If the Supreme Court of the United States would not have opined in the way that it did in the slaughterhouse cases, there would be no such thing as a state citizen. It would have gone the way of the dinosaur, which was the intent of the people who did it.
Can I offer a
So
bit of a
what do you
plug
have
for a
now?
sec?
You have a
Oh.
yes.
When somebody, if we're interested in the 14th Amendment, I don't know how you are with this. I think you are because you might have recommended it. Randy Barnett's book, Restore the Lost Constitution, uh, was what I felt like was a full expose on the 14th Amendment. But anyway, go on.
And look, there are problems with the 14th Amendment. You can go through the congressional record in
Mhm.
the 60s, like 63 or something like that, and you will find an entire section of the congressional record, members of Congress preaching about the fact that the 14th Amendment was never properly ratified. It worked an evil intent on the system. The Supreme Court of the United States did the best that it could do to try to prevent what the powerful party in Congress had tried to do. Now we're talking about the rhinos and the neocons of today. This is this group. They seized all the United States citizens and tried to make them all federal citizens so that you only had one citizenship. As it happens in the United States, when you were born a dual citizen. Why doesn't the government allow that to be talked about? Who knows that when they're born a dual citizen? Does anybody? The reason why is because the war between the two ideologies is not over, has never really been over. We've been fighting this out for a long time.
Hmm.
We've got those sons of bitches right now in a bit of a headlock. They
We
were
better hurry.
unable to well, they were
It seems
unable
like
to
anyway.
implement their agenda 100%. They were unable to pull it off. There was enough resistance. Just look at the 14th Amendment and the slaughterhouse cases. The
Mhm.
Supreme Court of the United States saved the United States from a fate worse than death. We would be in a much worse situation now much worse situation now because you can only have a dual federal system if the state governments have citizens who owe it allegiance.
And my argument was,
Otherwise, what is
why have state constitutions anyway? If if
right?
if we're all
What's the
beholden to
point?
the superior, right? Okay.
That's right. That what they tried to do was the vassal state arrangement
Right.
to hold the states as vassals underneath it. The Supreme Court of the United States, thank God for them, stopped it with the slaughterhouse cases and subsequent decisions afterwards, and it's never been overturned, never will be. They cannot allow the federal government to seize that position. It'll put an end to the republic overnight.
Right.
Okay. That's why all of this is really super important to understand. You have to understand what the jurisdictions are, who has the power in the area in question, what kind of power does that person have, or the state have, or the federal government had if in that area in question, etc. You cannot defend yourself without knowing that.
Amen.
Okay, I
True.
think
Okay,
I've hammered that home.
we're up at 320. Are you good or you want to keep going?
I'm good. I think we can get
Okay.
into the remainder stuff from there. We're going
Okay.
to have to get into Idaho a little bit because Idaho sort of forced the federal government into an admission, into being admitted into the union, and I don't think they were prepared for it. But we'll get into that in the next video.
Okay. So I think we're ending on roughly page 42 for anybody that's interested. That's chapter 5. Um, Ron, I really appreciate you being on with me again today. It's awesome that you've chosen me to be your pupile, your pupile, and I'm just excited about it. Thank you for that, and I'm hoping
Well,
that
thank
people
you,
are.
Tom. It's been really good. It's been really good.
I'm just hoping that people are gonna, I guess it doesn't matter if people watch our videos or not. We're having fun doing it. We're learning a lot. You get to teach somebody. I get to learn. You actually have somebody that's actually interested in it, which is great. But I think that it's important for us to know that none of this stuff is going to return void. So if we're going to do it, it's going to take hold somewhere. We're just hoping that it's going to um, happen faster than slower. So, um, Ron, I really appreciate your time. I think this is important for people that are struggling with issues with the whatever issue it is. I was just thinking that the CO2 pipelines in Iowa, the Lava Ridge project. So we should probably see if we can put that out there. And just ask people to buy the book, support the author, support your country, learn a little bit more about history that nobody else is talking about from one of your very own people here in Idaho. Um, and follow along. Go to the History of the United States, History of Federal Lands in the United States.com. You can reach out to the author there. You can ask any questions that you have. We're trying to be able to pay attention to those so that we can have that kind of dialogue. And we just look forward to having you join us again and hoping that you will share these videos as well. So, Ron, again, thank you so much. And I guess that we'll talk to you next time.
Absolutely, Tom. Thanks for having me, and God bless the United States.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I got to do.